Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming out. I'm going to present today some results from one of the projects that I've been working on for the last few months. And for this project, we've been collecting information about religion, fertility, and allo-mothering networks in the United States and in the United Kingdom. So why these topics? I think everybody here is affiliated with the project, so you know, but in case people tune in later, I'll introduce it a little bit. In short, religious families seemingly violate some evolutionary principles in a somewhat interesting way. Our project team is calling this the paradox of religious fertility. So this paradox is basically that evolutionary theory predicts that parents can choose between either investing energy in their current offspring or deciding to have more children. And this is what we call the offspring quantity-quality trade-off. And research has shown that the process of industrialization alongside the demographic transition have incentivized parents to invest more in fewer offspring rather than less in more offspring. So this means that in Western industrialized settings, there is a negative relationship between the number of children in a family and the outcomes for each child. At the same time, it's documented that in Western industrialized settings, religious individuals tend to have more children than their secular peers. This seems to be driven by the practice of religion, not just by having a religious affiliation. And I'm exemplifying this through the data that I'm showing on the right-hand side of the slide, which is from France. And basically what this shows is that people who identify as nominal Catholics or cultural Catholics, that is to say that they identify a religious affiliation but don't necessarily practice their faith, tend to have higher fertility than people who don't have a religion. But the people who are practicing Catholics, meaning that they go to church and they pray, have the highest fertility out of all three groups. So while religious families tend to be larger, children from these families actually do not seem to suffer the consequences of larger family sizes. Those are consequences that would be predicted by evolutionary theory. So we're interested in why that might be. And the project team has hypothesized that increased alloparenting may be at the center of this paradox. So alloparenting is when individuals who are not the child's parents contribute to caring for or investing in the child's survival and success. And across mammal species, alloparenting is quite rare, but it's a key feature of human reproductive systems. Cross-culturally, alloparenting is associated with both improved child outcomes and increased fertility. And alloparenting can either be direct or indirect. So that's to say, alloparents can either invest directly into a child by providing physical care for that child, or they can invest indirectly by performing tasks for the parents. So those tasks and that help then frees up the parents to devote more time to childcare. We know that cross-culturally, religious participation appears to increase trust and cooperation between individuals, especially when these individuals are attending services or religious rituals together. So our team has proposed that the increase in cooperation that is promoted by religion might also extend to increased cooperation in allocare. And through this increased allocare, religious individuals may be able to buffer their children from the quantity-quality trade-off. Our team has done some secondary data analyses in New Zealand and the UK that would support this hypothesis. So in this analysis, I'm going to focus on the role of kin in providing support to religious women. For me, this seemed like a logical place to start for a number of reasons that I'm about to outline. First, kin availability and kin orientation are shown to increase fertility in many contexts, although in industrialized settings, the evidence for that relationship is a bit more mixed. There are also some scholars that argue that higher fertility in religious individuals can be explained by quote unquote stronger religious values, so a greater orientation towards family and investment in family. Additionally, cross-culturally, we know that the most invested alloparents tend to be kin, and particularly those who are close kin. We've shown this to be true in the sample that I'm about to present as well. And this is exemplified in the plot on the right, where I'm showing that mothers tend to get most of their help from their partners for caring for their children. And when they do not have a partner, they turn to their relatives for more help. So basically, it seemed to me that if the paradox of religious fertility can be explained by increased allocare, and if kin provide most of that allocare, then examining kin orientation and kin contributions to allocare was a good place to start looking at this paradox. So prior to data collection, we pre-registered a set of predictions related to religion, fertility, allocare, and child outcomes. In this analysis, I focused on the ones from that set of hypotheses and predictions that were related to kin. I've listed them here. I will read them for you. So first, we predicted that religiosity would be positively associated with kin orientation, and we measured that through two measures. First, residential proximity to kin, and second, the kin density of social networks. Second, we predicted that religiosity would be positively associated with a number of kin that provided both childcare and household help to mothers. Third, we predicted that religiosity would be positively associated with fertility. This is like, we've used this more as an assumption check and to make sure that our data is adhering to what we know about Western populations. And fourth, we hypothesized that women who received more allocare from kin would have higher fertility. These pre-registered predictions are available on OSF on our project page. So the sample for this study was an online survey of women in the US and in the UK, which we ran in August and September of last year. The survey was disseminated through Prolific, which is an online service that matches researchers with survey participants. We opened 1,000 spots to participants in the UK and 1,000 spots to participants in the US. These were evenly allocated to women who had declared a religious affiliation and to women who had declared no religious affiliation in their Prolific profile. And I think our main and only inclusion criterion besides that was that each participant needed to have at least one child under the age of 5 years. The survey asked questions related to the women's religious practices, to their residential proximity to kin, their close social networks. We took a fertility history, and finally, we asked them to outline their help network. For the help network, we asked respondents to identify everyone who helped them perform certain childcare and household tasks, and then asked them how frequently each person performed that set of tasks. To get a number of helpers for each respondent, we simply filtered for helpers who had performed at least one allocare or household help tasks. Then we summed up the number of helpers across types. So these types were based on the helper's relationship to the mother and included categories such as partner, kin, non-kin, co-religionist, etc. To get an estimate of the amount of allocare and household help that the mother received, we converted the frequency of each task to an estimated number of times helped per month, and then summed the number of tasks received across the types of helper. I should note that in another paper, we tested 2 alternative schemes for operationalizing the amount of help received. And in that analysis, all 3 schemes yielded similar results. So as far as measuring religiosity, we'd collected multiple questions relating to this question in the survey. So we asked respondents how often they attended religious services, how often they prayed outside of these services. We asked them to rate how important religion was to them. And lastly, we asked them how many hours a week they dedicated to religious activities outside of services. It turned out that these 4 measures were all highly correlated. So we combined them using a polychoric factor analysis so that we could obtain a single religiosity score, which we then used in our models. We tested each of the predictions using Bayesian regression models. I'll skip the nitty-gritty of the model specifications, but I can speak more about them in the Q&A period if that's of interest, which I assume it will be. So now I'll go through the results for each prediction, and I'll stop to give a little discussion after each prediction. So the first prediction was that religiosity would be positively associated with kin orientation, again measured by 2 measures, residential proximity to kin and the kin density of social networks. So in terms of residential proximity to kin, the prediction was not supported. In fact, increasing religiosity was associated with decreased and not increased kin proximity, although the effect in the US was unclear, meaning that the credibility interval of the predictor overlapped with 0. Next, looking at the kin density of social networks. So once the size of the social network was controlled for, religiosity was not strongly associated with a greater number of kin in the social network. In fact, there was no impact of religiosity on kin in the social network. I did run models that did not control for the size of the social network. And in those models in the US, religious women tend to have more kin included in their, like, named as part of their social networks. But again, that effect disappeared once we controlled for the size of the social networks. And I also ran models that looked at the overall size of the social networks. And it didn't appear that greater religiosity predicted larger social networks consistently, either in the US or in the UK. So to me, this suggests that while religious women do not live near more kin, they still manage to maintain the kin density of their close social networks. And that the fact that they're maintaining the kin in their social networks, even though they live further away from their kin and perhaps see them less often, to me suggests that they're not necessarily less kin oriented. It's possible that women who move further away from kin wind up turning to religion for support and social connections. There is some literature that documents that diasporic communities can become more religious than their home communities. However, it's also possible that the relationship is the other way around, so that people who are more supported by a religious community are more likely to move away from their home community because they feel and they know that they will be supported in a new community. Basically, we're not sure what direction that effect works in. So moving on, the second prediction was that religiosity would be positively associated with the number of kin, providing allocare and household help to the mother. So for these, I defined kin as both the mother's partner, as well as the mother and the partner's kin. So this prediction was also not supported. Religiosity was not correlated to the number of kin that provided either of these types of help. However, the more we thought about this prediction, the more we agreed that the size of the network doesn't necessarily capture the amount of help that ends up being received by a mother. So we could conceive of a situation where a mother has like one very involved helper and she receives a lot of help versus a mother who has a larger help network, but where each helper contributes a small amount of help and overall she receives less help. So we also ran some models exploring the impact of religiosity on the overall amount of help received. I'm calling this prediction P2-ish because it wasn't formally registered, but I think it did show some interesting results. So when looking at the impact of religiosity on the amount of allocare and household help received, we found a different pattern than when we just looked at the number of helpers. In these models, religiosity was indeed associated with the amount of both allocare and household help that women received. In the UK, religiosity increased the amount of both types of help. But in the US, religiosity had a small positive impact on household help and a larger negative one on childcare help, which was interesting and unexpected. So when looking at the model predictions, the model predicted that the most religious women in the UK would get help with an additional 12 tasks of allocare and 24 tasks of household work in a month, and that's relative to the least religious women. Interestingly, in the US, although religion was a strong predictor of household help, that effect was quite small. So they only, the most religious women only received about 3 tasks of household help more a month than did the least religious women. And this increased help with household help would not be enough to offset the 12 fewer allocare tasks a month that the model predicts that they would receive. So to summarize these findings, because I know that there's quite a few models presented, women who are more religious don't necessarily have larger kin help networks, but they do receive more help with household work from kin than do less religious women. They also received more help with childcare in the UK, but not in the US. I do think it's interesting to note that differences in kin investment were primarily driven by non-partner kin. So people like the respondent's mother, sister, or her in-laws. There is some literature suggesting that religious fathers invest more in their children than do non-religious fathers, but we didn't find that here. Of course, we only measured the religiosity of the woman, not of her partner. So perhaps this is why we're not capturing differences in paternal investment here. Moving on to the third prediction, which was that religiosity would be positively associated with fertility. Again, this was primarily an assumption check. We just wanted to know that our sample was adhering to what we knew about fertility and religion in other contexts. So this prediction was supported, meaning that religiosity was associated with an increased number of births for age of the mother. Non-religious fertility was higher in the US than it was in the UK generally, but the effect of religiosity on fertility was larger in the UK than it was in the US. I'm going to move right on to prediction 4, which was that women who received more allocare from kin would have higher fertility. This prediction was not supported. We looked at 2 measures of fertility. So first, age-adjusted fertility, and second, whether or not the woman was planning on having another child within the following 2 years. I think we decided to look at 2 measures of fertility because fertility is a dynamic and longitudinal process, whereas our questions on help received were measuring help at a single point in time. We can think of age-adjusted fertility as a measure of past fertility behavior, while the intent to have another child is an indicator of future fertility intentions. And it's possible that current help may be differentially related to past and or future fertility. So first, the results from age-adjusted fertility. We found the opposite effect of what we predicted. In the UK, at least, receiving more help was associated with lower age-adjusted fertility. This was driven slightly more by childcare help, and the difference was driven more by non-partner help rather than help from the partner. I don't have those plots related to partner versus non-partner kin help up here on this page, but I do have them on an extra slide and I'm happy to show them in the Q&A. When looking at intent to have another child within 2 years, we found a different relationship between help and fertility. In the US, receiving more help was associated with somewhat lower odds of planning to progress to the next birth. And it was not associated with intent to progress in the UK. However, in the US, the credibility interval overlapped with 0, even at the 89% credibility interval level. So the effect was a little unclear. Here again, though, childcare help was more strongly correlated with the measure of fertility, and the difference was entirely driven by non-partner kin. Partner help was not clearly correlated with intent to progress. So to summarize the findings on this prediction, we found mixed evidence for negative correlation between allocare from kin and fertility. Women who received more help from kin had a lower age-adjusted fertility in the UK and had somewhat lower odds of planning to have another child in the US. In both cases, the effect was primarily driven by help from non-partner kin, and it was more closely tied to help with allocare and not with household tasks. So I've tried to go through and summarize the findings on each prediction as I've gone through the predictions, but I do want to take a step back and make a few comments about the big picture and what I'm planning to do next. On the whole, it seems that religiosity allows women to mobilize more help from their kin, even though they tend to have fewer kin residing near them. The fact that some of this help comes in the form of household help suggests that the help that a religious mother receives may free her up to be able to invest more in her children than non-religious mothers can. I did run models for the amount of time that kids spend in paid care, and those revealed that children born to religious mothers spend less time in paid care than children born to non-religious mothers. So again, it's possible that mothers are just taking on more of the burden of childcare when they're religious rather than when they're less religious. It would be really nice to be able to look at how maternal investments vary with religiosity. We could also look at how allocare and household help contributions from the help network are correlated with maternal investments. Unfortunately, a major limitation of the study is that I didn't think of measuring maternal investments in the survey. so we don't actually have access to that information. But I suspect it's likely that there are differences in maternal investment with varying religiosity, given that religious women have more kids and they do rely less on paid care. So I suspect that they're likely spending more time on childcare than non-religious women do. But anyway, that's just what I think is going on. And although religious women live with fewer kin nearby, it's not indicative of the composition of their kin networks. Religious women still maintain strong connections with their kin, and it's possible that kin continue to influence fertility transmission, fertility decisions and transmission of fertility norms through longer distance connections, which are upheld by virtual means such as phone calls or Zoom or text messaging. One kind of weird and unexpected finding of the study is that help appears to be negatively correlated with fertility. This appears counterintuitive, given that the cooperative breeding hypothesis suggests that alloparenting is precisely what's helped our species reach demographic success. One way to explain this finding is that it's possible that receiving more help is an indicator of actually just needing more help. There is some research which suggests that in industrialized settings, this may be the case. And certainly religious women in our sample have more kids, so they likely do have a greater need for alloparental support than less religious women. But I also think that I'm not fully happy with this portion of the analysis yet. For example, I ran models for all the women and I controlled for religiosity. However, John and I have talked about running models that are restricted to religious mothers only, potentially doing some mediation analysis to confirm the effect of the help variables for the religious mothers specifically. So I'd be especially glad to hear feedback on this portion of the analysis because it's definitely still evolving. Another question that I'm thinking a lot about is why there's a difference in effect, and especially in the direction of the effect in some predictions between the US and the UK. In some ways, the UK sample is nice because it provides cleaner and clearer results, which are more consistent with our hypotheses. But we also have data from the US, which is contradicting what we think should be happening in some key ways. Obviously, there are social demographic differences between the two countries. So for example, the US is more religious, and the women in our US sample, regardless of religiosity, tend to have lower kin proximity than women from the UK sample. I'm not sure if those differences are what's causing the different patterning that I showed here, but it's possible. The most unexpected difference was that religious mothers in the US get less allocare help from kin, while in the UK, the opposite is true. I will note that we reached our full sample size in the UK quite quickly, so we were able to, I think, get the full 1,000 women respondents. But we did struggle to get enough non-religious respondents in the US. And in fact, we did close the study before we reached our desired number of participants. We were just crawling upwards and we were not going to reach the full desired sample size, so we cut it off. And perhaps the difference in sample sizes between the US and the UK are also contributing to the differing results between the countries. And that brings me to the end of the presentation for today. I just want to say that thanks to everybody who showed up. Obviously, you guys are wonderful for making time in your summers to tune into this presentation. The survey and the pre-registration documents for the study were greatly improved by input from the whole evolutionary demography of religion team, and the project is supported by the John Templeton Foundation. So thanks again for tuning in, and I'm happy to answer any questions or hear any thoughts on the analysis. Thanks.
Hi, Laure. Great presentation. Thank you. I just had a quick question regarding your fourth prediction. When you were, I'm sorry if I missed this, but when you was that where more care is associated with lower fertility, especially in the UK? And that was coming from non-partnered kin. So was that across all women who were partnered and unpartnered, or does that also vary between partnership status?
Yeah, so I restrict that analysis to just partnered women. And I did that because I figured, like we know from another paper that we did that being partnered predicts strongly the amount of help that you're going to get. But I'm not entirely sure that that was the correct decision. So I'm happy if you want to tell me that I did the wrong thing or that it might tell me something different.
No, I was just wondering if that was an effect that could potentially be driven by women who weren't partnered. And it would also kind of link in to what you were saying about need, right? Because they would have higher need, but then also to potentially having lower fertility. But yeah, I guess it makes sense to limit it to partnered women.
Yeah, but you might be right too. I think there are some papers that argue that religious fertility is linked to longer duration of marriages and sustained partnerships. So it actually would be really interesting to run those models with all women and see whether potentially the partnership, duration is what, or the rates of partnership is causing some of that variation.
Yeah, were religious women more likely to be partnered?
And
like in this
I'm not super sure off the top of my head, but I think so.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks.
I can't see everybody. Oh, Mary.
Okay, there we go. Yeah, I feel like I should, because I think many of you were here and saw Robert's presentation last month. And one of the things that we found particularly fascinating was something that he says is in common with this result. And I'm trying to remember because he's out of town right now, so he couldn't be here. But just to point out that I think we had this interestingly similar result where religious women didn't necessarily have greater proximity of kin, but that the kin were sort of somehow more involved or having some additional effect on women, which is not. These are very, very different social contexts. And when I think about that result, I would have assumed that that was something that was very context specific, but we had this extremely similar result, which I don't know if you have thoughts on why that might be true. We're writing up the second paper now, we're going to publish with a similar kind of result. And even though we don't have the alloparenting effects in the particular paper yet, in a very big way, most of it's really about the structure of kin networks and non-kin networks. The information we do have about allocare in that particular paper also suggests that kin aren't really necessarily helping you more with tasks, but they're providing more emotional support. And that's something that can be done at a distance. And even in rural Bangladesh, a lot of that is happening at a distance through mobile phones or through visits. So yeah, I don't know. Yeah.
I think that's what I was trying to get at with the kin density of the social network. Trying to see, I do have some measures of how often they're contacting each of their social network members, so I could deepen that analysis and see if they do, get in touch with kin members more often than less religious women. I haven't looked at that, but I kind of suspect that this is what is happening. Anecdotally, I've made connections in the place that I'm living now with a few people in a religious community, and they have had parents move, like after having kids, they have had parents move closer to be with them and to help them raise their kids. And I wonder if maybe this kind of effect is what's going on in the US, where people are, retiring, and religious people, want to be close. I mean, also non-religious people, but people want to be close to their kids and to their grandkids, and they're more willing to move afterwards. and
I
they're
think
able
that's
to do
worth,
that?
yeah, I think that's worth considering, but I think we probably should both take note of the fact that at least this would be consistent with the US, that religious people may have shorter generation times, and therefore the grandparents may be in a better position to move to be near kin rather than being older or more limited in what they can do. So I think that's something worth looking into too. But you're right, that's a reasonable, I mean, that's a plausible mechanism.
Mhm. Yeah, I was really interested because I got to see Robert and I were chatting earlier in the year when we were both kind of still coming out with these results. And we were both kind of shocked to see that kin orientation was actually lower, sorry, kin proximity was lower in religious individuals rather than less religious individuals, which is completely opposite to what we'd predicted, right? So I think it is interesting that this is existing across all three contexts.
Yeah, that's really, yeah, I think quite unexpected and something we should think about.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I'm done.
Thanks. Rebecca?
Hi, Laura, that was great. I have a couple of questions, and I do apologize if you have answered these, and the talk is a little bit late here, so I might have missed it. My first question is a descriptive question. So with the religion, do you have any variation in religion, or is it mainly Christian women in both contexts?
It is mainly Christian women, but of several different denominations. I'm just going to flip to another slide. Okay, so that should show you kind of what we've got. So we do have mostly Catholic and Protestant and other kinds of Christian women. We do have a small sample of Latter-day Saint women in the US and more Muslim women in the UK. But you're right that the sample sizes for non-Christian faiths are quite small.
Okay, that's great. So you couldn't really separate out different religions and do different analyses.
So John and I have talked about doing that for the religions that are more represented. So I think I could do that with the sub kinds of Christian faiths and probably also the Muslim individuals. I don't think I have enough for the Hindu women. And the other women are kind of a composite of different faiths. So there's a couple women who identify as Jewish. I'm not remembering the other faiths at the top of my head. But I think I probably couldn't meaningfully look at that.
Okay, thanks. This is just a comment, possibly not relevant in the context you're looking at right now, but I've had a couple of conversations recently with people who have pointed out that in Africa, at least, the recent evangelical Christians that have been quite active in the continent have been quite anti-family, in particular with regards to grandmothers. They have been promoting the idea that grandmothers are witches and that their influence should be reduced within the family. That's a very different context. I don't know if you've heard or read anything similar about these denominations in the US or the UK.
I have not. I'm aware that there's some strange transmission of, not strange, but some unusual and unexpected transmissions of cultural norms by these evangelical faiths about people in the US, in that like people from the US will go and do mission trips over in Africa and then transmit social ideas that are specific to a US context, but that end up influencing how people act at home in Africa. But I'm not familiar with different norms about family involvement being transmitted.
Okay, my other question was about the association between receiving help and lower fertility. Did you break that down by different types of help? I'm thinking about Susie's work in the UK, where she showed that financial help was associated with lower fertility, but emotional support with higher fertility.
Yeah, let me flip back to that slide. See if I can get there. So over here I have household help and childcare help. And those are the two measures of help. Those are the two types of help that I measured more intensely. And I think both show kind of the same thing, where the types of help are associated in similar directions, but maybe not as strongly. So for example, where was it? Yeah, so for example, in this plot in the UK, the amount of childcare help that is received by a woman is more tightly correlated with her fertility than the amount of household help that she receives. But I don't have any measures of financial help or strictly of emotional support either, so I can't look at that.
Did you do any interactions with socioeconomic position? Because again, Susie's findings were that in the UK, in more disadvantaged groups, childcare help was associated with higher fertility, whereas in more advantaged groups, it was possibly associated with lower fertility.
No, I haven't, and that's an excellent idea. And I know that you brought that up in a previous paper, and I've completely forgotten to apply it also to this one. Thank you. She just entered an interaction variable, an interaction coefficient, hey?
I think she stratified the analysis in terms of low, medium, and high socioeconomic position.
Gotcha.
And in fact, the association with the more advantaged groups that in terms of low fertility wasn't that strong, just because there were actually very few women who were very socioeconomically advantaged who were getting childcare help from their kin.
That sounds really interesting. I think I will pursue that, and I'll look up her paper and see the details of what she did. Thank you. Thank you for the suggestion.
Great, thanks a lot. It's a really interesting presentation.
Thank you.
Laure, I know we talked about this before, but can you maybe go back to the denominations and fertility slide?
Yeah.
I know you and I independently talked about this, but so what are the unaffiliated, that's non-religious, is that right? Because I know you have a lot of people in there who identify as religious but don't actually do anything religious in nature, so they don't pray or go to church. And the first slide you showed, I thought that plot was great with the Catholic women in France, where identification wasn't really very different. Non-identified and identified groups weren't very different. So I was just wondering if what that unaffiliated group is that just no religion at all? Because you still have a religion score on there. And so maybe, I don't know, classifying. So on this anyway, there's no fertility for like purely non-religious groups, I guess. So I was just wondering sort of how that group is classified and whether or not, because it looks, for example, the regression line there looks a lot like Protestant women, at least in the US. So I was wondering, like, maybe if you could do something with the analyses to adjust for those women or take them out or something like that, you might have different effects.
Okay, I think there's a couple of points in that question, and I'm happy to address them all, and let me know if I've missed anything. But the first thing to say is that I made a mistake. So these plots are actually age-adjusted fertility. So it's not, the x-axis is not religion score, it's age.
Okay.
Religion score was from the first plot that I showed you before we talked about that, but these are age-adjusted. These are like fertility, number of births across the reproductive span. And yeah, it's weird that, for example, Hindu women have lower fertility as they get older in the US, but that's just an artifact of a small sample size. The second is that, yes, Protestant women don't have very different fertility rates from unaffiliated women. And I noticed this also in the model predictions, they have very similar intercepts. And then the thing about unaffiliated women, so this plot here shows the affiliation that women indicated as part of their demographic a part the demographic portion of the questionnaires. So I asked women first if they identified with a religion. So if they were affiliated with a religion, and they were able to check that they were unaffiliated. And I don't remember right off the top of my head if I asked whether they considered themselves agnostic or atheist. Now I'm losing steam. I'm forgetting the other portions of that. Oh yeah, and lastly, I did allow unaffiliated women to answer questions about whether they prayed. I didn't ask them about a house of worship because it didn't seem relevant to women who are unaffiliated, but I did allow them to say if they were praying on any kind of basis, or if they considered that their religion or lack of religion was important to them. So there are some women who are unaffiliated who have slightly more than the minimum religious score. But I think that's okay. It's very few women, and we wanted to look at the impact of, religiosity and spirituality, not just having declaring a religious affiliation. We wanted to know about the practice of religion as well. So I don't know if that really answered all the parts of your question, but I hope that it addressed some of it.
Well, I think the x-axis correction answered most of them. I was sort of puzzled by
That's my bad.
Yeah, the highly religious unaffiliated women, essentially. But that I still that I guess the categorization and the variation in religiosity within them suggests, I guess, maybe a finer grain look at the different denominations.
Mm-hmm.
Although just looking at this here, the regression lines look pretty similar, with the exception of the Mormons.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that fertility just seems higher in the US.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Also, I enjoyed your talk a lot. Thank you.
Thanks.
If there are no other questions, I think maybe we should end there. Thank you, Laure. And I'm not sure of the date exactly, but in about 1 month-ish, Joseph will talk with us, and it will be our next talk. So yeah, thank you, Laure, and we'll see you all soon.
Bye, everyone. Looking forward to your talk, Joseph.
And I do think that's the 17th, but I could be wrong.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.